Hello and welcome to In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast.
अभी तो बहुत बड़ा सपना है हमारा.
मुझे कामनी बहुत जरूरत है, मैं ले जाऊं.
अब हम लोग के पास कैपिटल आ गया, अब हम लोग खुल के करेंगे बिजनेस.
સમયમાં તો જોવા જઈએ તો આપણો બધો કામમાં જ સમય જાય છે. પોતાના માટે સમય કાઢવો બહુ મુશ્કેલ હોય છે.
अभी हम लोग मतलब ये पैसा राउंड होते होते हम लोग 12-13 लाख का बिजनेस चल रहा है.
You have tuned into In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast. Hi Aditi. We're very pleased to have you on the podcast with us today. For everybody listening, Dr. Aditi Suri is a senior consultant at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, IHS, which is an organization based in Bangalore. She's an expert on digital labor platforms, worker well-being, and livelihoods in India. And at IHS, she leads the academic and policy research portfolio on technology and society. Aditi has done several sectoral studies of workers across digital labor platforms, describing their work conditions, experience of platform design, and the nature of risk on platforms. Most recently, Aditi has co-edited a book called Platformization and Informality, which was published just last year in 2023. It's an excellent book, highly recommend it. It brings together several scholars into a dialogue on Global South specific frameworks to understand regulation of platform work. Aditi, absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sony, for having me.
Great. We're going to begin a bit differently today with a word association, game. So, like it follows, I will throw some words at you and you tell me the first thing that you think of. So, the first thing I will say is digital work platforms.
Future of work.
Women's work.
Empowerment.
Gig work.
Informal work.
Social security.
Much necessary.
And youth unemployment.
Very saddening.
Yeah, and maybe we can pick up on that and you can tell us a bit more about what the situation is. Why is it that it is saddening?
Yeah. I think one of India's most pressing concerns is currently the availability of jobs and also the quality of those jobs where they are available. And so, as you said, in the last few years of my research profession, I have looked very specifically at what technology is doing to create jobs and shape jobs and job quality. And more specifically, last 3 years, I've spent really looking at women who have graduate degrees and what they're doing in the labor force. And what we've seen is the women who are leaving engineering colleges, who come with bachelors in STEM disciplines, they are the ones who are really going into poor quality platform work, which is home-based. And which to me is problematic on so many levels, right? Like for us as a country, education has been such an important lever of development, not only nationally for economic growth, but also in terms of social justice and empowerment. And so like the returns on that education and the effort people put into it, the household incomes and the investments that go into education are really not bearing any fruit. And so my fear is that while we have this idea of youth unemployment, even the youth that are employed are doing this low quality work on online labor platforms where they might be doing small time content creation, transcription work, data entry, data annotation. And for them, this is their experience of almost their first jobs. And it also raises a question for me of what do we expect as in terms of empowerment of women when we only expect them to be working from home, right? For many decades, we have wanted women to go out, to have access to public spaces, to be able to create networks and networks of peers and associations so that there's co-learning, so that they learn how to better structure their work and ask for better incomes. And what we're seeing with the age of technology is that a lot of that is being very restricted. And so often we have this idea that, smart social media platforms can give us access to democratic forms of communication, which may be so in terms of opinion and media, but not so in terms of livelihoods, because to have an effective and holistic livelihood where you feel accomplished also at the end of the day. You really need to have peers and access to different kinds of stimulation that allows you to have to build a selfhood around work. And I feel like all of those layers together we're really seeing depreciate when it comes to the idea of the future of work. And so for me, the question is not just of how many jobs are available, but what are people actually doing in these jobs, and what are their lives going to look like when they become mothers and they have to do, create new forms of social reproduction for the next generation, who could be working even more closely with artificial intelligence services.
Right, and that figures why you related gig work with informal work, because what you've just described is very much a replication of what we've been seeing in the informal economy. Home-based work, lacking protection, lacking worker well-being, lacking occupational safety and health. But at the same time, Aditi, we've been seeing, at least in India in the past few years, that platforms are being positioned as livelihood generation mechanisms. We've been hearing even from state that platforms have the potential to create jobs for young people. I mean, just yesterday I was on Urban Company's Twitter page, and it seems that they've tied up with the government of Andhra Pradesh in Vijayawada to onboard workers onto Urban Company as a measure to deal with the livelihood fallout during the flood, as a measure for flood restoration with respect to livelihood. What do you make of this? Can platforms solve the massive youth employment problem? They're not currently doing it, but can they solve the youth unemployment problem that India is facing?
Yeah. I think the idea that platforms have been able to create a whole new set of jobs has both sides to it. I do think there is a truth to the to numerically thinking about the jobs that exist in terms of what they were before. But the thing is, the platform model, essentially what it does is it breaks down what would have been a holistic full-time job and gives it to a crowd of workers. So in that sense, yes, there are more numerically there are more people who are doing work, but they are not fully employed in that sense. And that has always this is a very specific problem and challenge that the platform economy creates. But the idea of underemployment is something we have traditionally also dealt with in the Indian economy. So I actually find that a lot of the challenges we find in the platform economy are becoming entrenched, really, because once you add a very specific technical architecture to how these things get structured, it's much harder to move them around or to know who to appeal to, because changing an algorithm, for example, requires a whole different set of ideas around power and who you speak to and who you advocate to, as compared to changing regular corporations where we have a fairly clear idea about how corporations are structured. Here, a lot of corporate structure has moved into technical architecture, making that quite difficult. And I also just want to come back to one of the earlier points you were making about, when you said gig work, I said informal work. I think one of the things that we need to even think about better as people in the research or policy space or thinking about the future of our economy is the words we give things that we look at. So, the idea of the home-based worker became so important to women's work, and it became something for everyone to really advocate behind calling people this. It was to visibilize work, but also tell women that they were actually working. It was giving them an identity. The challenge with thinking about the concept of gig work in India is that most of our economy is gig work. And so I actually think it's better to continue to talk about informal work and then talk about platform work in different breadths, because it helps articulate that difference. Gig work has been a very important political rallying cry in Europe and in America, and it's helped people come together in those economies. But for us, I really think differentiating between these things is also important. So while we continue to think about how the quality of these jobs are, I do think even as a research community, we should be better about how we position this. Your example about Urban Company, I think it's a very telling case that in moments of climate resilience, platforms are like some of the easiest employers to contact, right? And I think that is something that the platform economy has been able to do compared to the informal economy here. You have specific companies who are very visible and who are aggregate in a corporate form and an organizational structure that allows for very easy communication between governments and firms, which is something that was completely lacking in the informal economy, right? Because you had small enterprises, individual firms. There were many industrial policies that tried to say cluster informal enterprises together or create a common ground through economic geography. But now you have this expansive technical architecture that can do that for you. And I think that is something very valuable that the platform economy is offering to the state with a capital S, right? Which is, so in my view, when I think about what technology has done to the informal economy, I think there were many governance voids that existed that technical architecture has been able to solve for, and at a scale that we haven't really been able to see before. So while I do think the job quality question is always open, I do think these were pressing and enduring issues we had on the informal economy. And so I take platforms very seriously when they come to plug these gaps, because I think that is the real value they're offering, which probably allows many other agencies to allow them to be rather than intervening in them.
Right. And if I can kind of press you on that question of can platforms create decent work? And I know you're going to say yes, they can, but they need regulation. So if I can then push you and ask you, what is that? What does that regulation look like? Because we've had some interventions in Rajasthan. Simultaneously, we're seeing that young people are looking at platforms for work, right? These are easier, lower barriers of entry, I suppose, into accessing platform work. But what needs to happen now? The regulatory framework. Is the Rajasthan example a good place to start? What was it lacking? Where do we need to step in more in terms of regulation?
Yeah. And my point on the urban company example was not that they're creating better quality jobs. It's that they are solving a problem that the state had, not being able to visibly find the informal economy or to orchestrate different parts of it. So that's not even a job quality question. I think that's still a very open question. But I do think the Indian platform economy is very vast. I do think there are many different types of business models that exist. And so I am going to answer your question in two ways. There's, of course, the social security question, which I'll just come to. But there are software services companies that allow kind of individual educators or individuals in a self-employment capacity to offer their services online. And here you have a technology company that doesn't control and supervise how much you charge for something, the hours of your work. So in that sense, I do see those people also as working off of platforms, but they're not the same kind of disguised employment that we see in, say, the food delivery companies or the taxi companies or the beauty work companies. So there are little examples here where there is a bit of hope on how to manipulate technology for the better outcomes of workers. And you would be better placed to talk about how cooperatives are also trying to use some of these. So I won't really go into that, but there is hope in seeing that some of these different non-capitalist forms can also kind of take on technology. In terms of ensuring quality jobs, I think that's a really, really challenging question, because there doesn't seem to be any move in our country to legislate for better quality jobs when it comes to the platform economy, nor frankly for any other part of the informal economy. And that's for several reasons. We've had very emancipatory conventions around domestic workers that have existed, but the enactment of those and implementation have been very weak. And similarly, and actually not similarly, dissimilarly, I would think that in the platform economy, because there is, like I said, a technical architecture, a corporate form that exists that can orchestrate large numbers of workers, that there would be better implementation and operationalization of public policy programs. And so that is the kind of hope that I think both the states, central government and state governments are working with. And so, what exists right now in India is a legal space for platform workers to be able to get access to social security, but it is not a right, and it is not necessarily a claim to workers' rights either. it is a claim to vulnerability. So in that sense, there's only there's only access to certain kinds of pensions and accident insurances that are really being talked about right now. And the way this is taking place is adopting the governance architecture of what happens with informal workers, where you try and bring together employers in the middle and say, please verify who your workers are, and if they are verified, then together we can put a corpus in place and try and deliver some social security benefits to those workers. And so very interestingly, it's the same architecture, same governance model. And I've been part of some of the dialogues that are happening in different states also that are trying to adopt this model. And it seems to be that the challenge is that there's no sustainable financing currently for these. There's a bit of a sway in political will as to implementing this as well. And one of the larger gaps that exists is, again, the state, not the state with a capital S, not being able to know who platform workers are. That's still an open question, right? And so one of the really lovely things that the Rajasthan policy was trying to do was to create a data repository that enabled the state government of Rajasthan to have access to to the numerical strength of transactions taking place on a platform, right, with non-identifiable information. And that to me was the really compelling thing that the Rajasthan policy tried to do, was in the form of a welfare board to try and create this data repository. And so I do think, thinking as an incrementalist, even if we get to the point where we know how many platform workers exist in the country or in different states, that would be a step up from where we are now. And so, in the idea of getting quality jobs and social security for workers, we have many steps to go. And so we start at even knowing who workers are and then implementing social security programs. So it's heartening to see that some of these conversations are being taken very seriously now, and even at the central government level. And so maybe in the next 5 years, we'll have a little bit more clarity on where that can go. But there does seem to be a very strong advocacy to prevent some of these things from happening also. So.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I've just seen recently that with eShram, I think states are now, or the center is now asking for platforms to onboard their workers onto eShram. We'll see where that goes. It could go both ways, but there seems to be some beginnings of regulation that we're seeing. But I'll shift gears a bit, Aditi, and ask you something adjacent, which is that, the way the platform economy unfolded in India, there are basically two sectors that are driving it, the cab hailing and the delivery sector, and some corpus of workers in beauty and wellness as well. Is it that with the thrust on these two sectors, of course, there is a whole flux of workers entering, largely male, it is a male-dominated space. Do you think that it has given some space for women to start entering these male-dominated sectors of work, and especially young women?
You're absolutely right. I think the two major drivers have been the driving space and the food delivery space. So I'll speak. I have had the good fortune or presence to speak to many companies over the years, because for me, I think trying to understand the company design perspective has also been very important, because they were all so new for so many years. And interestingly, all the major cab ride-hailing platforms have attempted to create programs that bring women into the workforce, and they have tried to skill women. They've tried to retain them in terms of retain them on the platform. And I think what they found was that the cultural hesitance was very strong in preventing women from joining the platform, right? Because there is also a pretty big flaw in the design of it, which is that the women who join the platform are constantly competing against men who have more time and more risk-taking ability to traverse longer journeys. And the fact that in a car you're stuck in a very intimate environment, which creates a lot of violence against male drivers also, and most definitely, creates threats against sexual and physical violence for women. And really no one has been able to solve away from that. Even if we look at some of the newer companies like Blue Smart that have a regular base of drivers, in that sense that they are formal employees and they are full-time employees, even there's a big hesitation to allow women to leave the house to do that kind of work. So I think the challenge is that while those are good jobs to think of from the platform point of view, where you can have quickly transactable services, women don't operate in quickly transactable services. Women's work in India it tends to be very regular and tends to have repeated interactions. And I was actually intrigued to learn of this finding from someone who runs a platform adjacent company that helps do wide scale countrywide recruitment for some of these platforms. Is that he's like, none of these on-demand platforms understand that women need safe spaces and they need repeatable interactions with regular wages. That's essentially the thing that holds women in jobs, and that the service economy is being very poor for providing some of those things. But like I said, there are hundreds and thousands of Indian women who are working from home as these digital home-based workers now, in the education technology space, in earning money from affiliate marketing, from social commerce. So we do see a bit of an upsurge in women's economic activity, even though it is not coming in the form of this secure kind of work.
And that again goes back to, it really is a replication of informal work. And you're right in saying that maybe it doesn't work in our context to differentiate between gig workers and informal workers. You would just be kind of, it doesn't help to subclassify that way. And you're right. I think what you're trying to say is that the sociocultural norms persist regardless of the entry of platforms, and those really influence the way women are able to. I think I remember Uber had tried to, do this tie-up with, was it Cafe Coffee Day, where they made toilets available to women drivers, but that just sort of solves a superficial, one bit of problem. The broader problem is much larger in terms of mobility and access to public spaces.
Yeah, the interesting couple of more things is that as these companies go into IPO and go into public markets, they do draw more scrutiny in terms of why women don't access them. So the question of how to get women on platforms is a question they're also trying to answer. It's just that most platforms that are that scale don't design in a gender transformational way. They design in a gender blind way, as a way of creating a meritocratic labor market, right, on a platform. So in that sense, that competition will never allow women to do well. And the terms of that competition are structured against people who are time poor and who are resource poor.
Yeah. And also perhaps, if we solve for the sort of social protection access, that does work in a more gender inclusive way as well. So strategies that platforms can apply are really to offer full employment, and that would influence the entry of more women. And there are domestic work platforms sort of, growing, still trying to find a sort of business model that works for them, etc. So perhaps we still need to see where this will kind of go. The other question, Aditi, I have is that, all of these platforms that we've been seeing are under the narrative of entrepreneurship. Largely these provide spaces to individual workers, self-employed workers. There is a space of collective models. We've seen this largely in the example of, say, the global north. Not so many examples of collective platforms in India, apart from a few in Kerala, I believe. But if I can ask you, what do we need to get to a place where collectives can look at platforms as a viable models? What are the pieces that collectives need in order to be able to do this?
That's a great question, because that is the place that we would want everyone to be in the world. I think there is a gap between collectives and what they think of the economy, and technologists who build technology and what they think of the economy. There's a gap there, but there's also a gap in understanding the literacy and fluency of collectives or people who are in collectives, and I would say even the thinking on how we measure and gauge the literacy and fluency of even a platform worker, right? I mean, there is this overarching popular notion that, you know, everyone in India uses a smartphone. They don't really know what's happening on the smartphone. They're just visually piecing it together, almost as if it's a jugaad literacy, right, of a smartphone. And we don't really take quite seriously what those practices and strategies are, where people learn what this technological system is who are not digital natives. And so I do think that even in some of our frameworks of articulating the collective's desires of the internet needs a lot of grounding, and needs to you need to be asking the right questions and then matching those to what's possible in the technical architecture. You know, I've been approached by like lots of engineering groups in the last few months who are like, please take us to collectives, we will give them technology. So there's also a gap there in them assuming that any collective knows what they want, or a collective desiring, you know, access to the internet economy. So there's also this kind of macro question I always have of, where are these technical, you know, folks being educated, and what's their approach to even the rest of the world around them? So I do think there's something in the fluency and literacy measurements that we need to understand what people's ability is, and then adequately kind of scope that. There is also a need for more collectives to be made. I don't think there are enough collectives, especially in urban India where I work more. There's an urbanity to a lot of the platform workers here, which bring on the same levels of like anonymity and class and caste that really divide people and keep them quite segregated. And it's interesting, but people may come together on community for, say, financial matters and for debt and credit. It doesn't seem to translate onto business or employment or livelihoods. And so there's something missing there, and also building a collective identity for people. And, you know, in other work at IHS, we do see that happening in terms of housing rights, or asking for rights for legalizing land. But it just gets missed in the livelihood context, because there seems to be so much competition amongst people in cities just for that extra 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees that's really quite detrimental to building that collective agency.
You're absolutely, I mean, bang on, I think, Aditi, with, you know, the multiplicity of identities that each person carries, and particularly women. Which one takes precedence when you're in such economic need? I think that's a question that collectives often fail to answer, and the way they organize is around, say, one identity while disregarding the others. So that's a serious question, or a look that collectives need to take at themselves. I have just a couple more questions. One is that the platforms are here to stay. The way they grow is something we're watching. In the next 5 years, what do you think a young worker entering the employment market in India, possibly looking at platforms, you know, for employment, what should they bear in mind?
I think young workers entering India are in quite a scary place, actually, because I think as people seek jobs, they are first met not by opportunity but by scams. And I think one of the biggest things that I figured out or learned in the last 4 years about looking at people who work from home on platforms rather than people who work out on our streets doing, you know, physical platform work, is that there is such a heightened sense of fear amongst women workers online as to who is contacting them, who is asking for their financial information, and who are they revealing their photos to, their social media profiles to, whether they're going to be working for authentic employers or not. And so these are fairly new challenges to have if you're not a digital native. And I guess maybe coming back to your question, younger people are digital natives in that sense, but they might, we all have a journey of learning how to avoid or detect fraud on the internet. And I don't think there's enough kind of resources or soft skills out there for people to really understand that. And especially if we think about young women workers who might be very apprehensive about sharing their failures, because they're already navigating a very complex household environment where they're trying to work. I think many of these stories we've seen really they don't get spoken about. So I do think that's one big thing that people have to think about. The other is, I think, young people who are leaving maybe the technical allied disciplines, like say doing data analysis work or doing work around language that now can be done online. I think they need to be very sure what their understanding of job quality is when they go in. Last couple of years doing this research, we found that there were young women who were leaving training centers in data science, and they were leaving them thinking they had a placement, but they were getting placed on a microtasking platform. And they thought that doing data labeling work and data entry work was giving them experiences to become a data scientist. And this was such a large schism between what those things are going to lead to them. It was really upsetting to think that you can be so educated, you can have access to all these resources, but you're still not being able to fully comprehend job quality. So I do think that that's a really important question and thought for young people to have before even entering the labor market. How do I want to be treated? What are the things I want to be doing? Can I find those opportunities? And how do I structure my career in a way that I eventually get there, even if I can't do it at an entry-level job?
That's such a great point. And I think that's also a call for organizations working with young people to educate young people in these aspects on, what is it that you should demand from the labor market. I have one last question, Aditi, which is that you work at IHS, which, is a place where there is academics, academia and teaching, but there's also, you're also offering expertise to policymakers, to funders, etc. So it really straddles a couple of worlds. For young people listening to the podcast and maybe who are interested in entering a space such as this, what should they keep in mind? What should their shorter term goals be? What skills should they be building if they want to enter a space like that?
In the research and kind of advocacy practice space?
Yes.
Okay. I think having a strong grounding on fundamental concepts is quite important to be in this space. I think what I've observed in the last maybe 10 years in the research and policy space is that while many people have been able to enter, a lot of them come with a weaker access of of their maybe moral judgment or what's right for the world, right? And so I do think actually fundamentals about feminism or empowerment or what the economy should look like is something you need to have in your mind before you enter this space, because there are many competing people who want to do advocacy around the same thing. So I think really having that clear is very important, because I think the opportunities for skilling are very vast in India. There are many MOOCs you can do, there are offline trainings, there are all these things you can do, but fundamentally to know who you are as a person at your core.
So generally young people need to be more introspective, I think, throughout. That's great advice. Thanks so much, Aditi. This was, it's always great speaking to you. There was a great conversation today. And we will speak to each other soon. If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, do share it with your friends and family. If you would like to collaborate or partner with us or get in touch with our women's cooperatives, write to us at communications@sevafederation.org. We'll be back with another guest in the next episode. Until then, stay tuned to In Solidarity.